Why is it that children are sometimes better at treasure hunting than adults? And we think about treasure hunting in the literal traditional sense, maybe things like Easter egg hunts or hunting for these designed treasures that are around, but sometimes you will find that children bring some skills and some mindsets that we can learn from. Now, of course, I'm not saying that children can solve complex ciphers all of the time and some of the things that are beyond the level of their cognitive development. But there are some mindsets that we see with children that lead them to discovering things and seeing things that we often miss. And of course, in this channel, I'm not just talking about literal treasure hunts, but I'm talking about those metaphorical ones, the way that we go about solving problems and seeking and discovering truth in all of work and life and throughout. So let's take a look at 5 things that children do really well that we would be wise to pay attention to and to learn from and to keep and to kindle in our own mindsets and attitudes. The first one, in many contexts, that kids embrace trial and error. They dive in, they experiment, they're willing to just test some things out and jump in. They don't just sort of sit back and watch and overthink things. Sometimes they will just jump in and start trying different things. And there have even been experiments of where groups of children are outperforming engineering students in some tasks and problems simply because the children are engaging in more repetitions of trial and error and trying different things and learning from it quickly. And that can be very useful in our lives, our metaphorical and literal treasure hunting. Second one is they question the obvious. They ask, why not? It's a question that exposes hidden possibilities. They're not so tied to their prior knowledge because they have less prior knowledge. And we come to things with an assumption of how the world is supposed to operate. And sometimes that blinds us from the possibilities that are right in front of us. We've actually excluded those possibilities before they even come to mind. And so how is it that we can begin to cultivate in ourselves that novice's mindset, one that's looking at it as if for the first time? And I've been experimenting with different ways to approach that. I'll probably create another video dedicated specifically to that idea in the future, but I encourage you to consider that and consider how you might be able to play with that idea. Speaking of playing with that idea, the third one is they stay playful with the puzzles and the problems and the challenges and the treasure hunts and the things that are going on. They see it as a form of play. Curiosity, not rigid thinking, playfulness. We can discover a lot of things by approaching it with a spirit of playfulness. If we approach it with too much seriousness, or we see it as this high-stakes thing, or we let our emotions kind of get in the way, and we're letting our fear or our drive to win or over-competitiveness, sometimes that gets in the way, whereas this spirit of playfulness, I'm just going to dabble and play and again experiment, that can create some really neat opportunities. And it doesn't mean that you have to act on all of it. You can do some playful thought experiments with problem solving that might introduce ideas otherwise that you would have otherwise forgotten about or never even considered. The fourth one is related to the playfulness, that children are oftentimes not afraid to look a little bit silly, to do things that they're a little less worried, I guess, about appearance sometimes, and to do things, to look at things differently. Imagine that you're in the room and you're trying to find something and you're trying to look professional and so forth, and the child is looking and they just dive on the ground, they put their head on the ground, they look at it from a different angle, they start hopping up on things. They're not afraid to look a little bit silly or do things that are a little more out of the ordinary, and we can sometimes remember and learn from that as we're going about these searches in our own life, the problem solving. Am I willing to just do the metaphorical or literal version of getting my head on the ground and looking at it from a different angle, or standing up high, or jumping up, or running around and seeing it from another perspective? Am I willing to look a little bit silly for the sake of solving the problem or the clue? And a fifth one is they notice things that adults often just naturally filter out. There's this kind of childlike awareness they just notice details that others seem to miss. There's a curiosity that they bring with them to a new environment and a new place where they're really trying to soak everything in and look around and notice nuance and pay attention to it, where again sometimes we can just default to our prior knowledge and prior experiences, and we walk in and you're walking through the zoo and you see a lion. Oh yeah, it's a lion. I've seen lions before. That lion's laying there. But the child is paying attention to some of the nuances and the details, allowing themselves to be deeply curious. I've done this often in meetings where I will have someone that's presenting an idea, and I will ask everyone else in the room, I ask you to take a posture of curiosity. Ask questions, be deeply curious. Pretend a bit like you're a child and you just want to get under the hood and understand everything about it. You're just fascinated by it, and you choose to be fascinated by the topic. And that can produce some good results. So we have embracing trial and error, questioning the obvious, staying playful, not being afraid to look a little bit silly, and letting your curiosity keep you from filtering out the things that many others do. If we apply these 5 things a little bit more in our problem solving and our metaphorical and literal treasure hunting, I think we'll get some good results. Regardless, maybe we'll have a little bit more fun.